Guys, and welcome to another edition of The Kevin Moore Show. Now on today's show, I'm about to be joined by my guest, Ken Johnston Sr. Now Ken was one of 4 civilian astronaut consultant pilots from the Apollo moon program. Ken is a retired aerospace worker and is a well-known NASA whistleblower. Ken is well known because he was witness to history to NASA image manipulation. Now, Ken studied at the Oklahoma Military Academy and Oklahoma City University before he enlisted in the military. Ken enlisted in the U.S. Marines and earned his FAA pilot's license as a single and multi-engine instrument-rated flight instructor and was a qualified avionics technician, just to name a few. So enjoy my interview with Ken. Well, Ken Johnston Sr., thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
It's great to have you on. We've just met at Contacting the Desert,
right.
And thank you for agreeing to do an interview with us. I really do appreciate that.
Certainly.
You've got a fascinating story to tell about your time in NASA. So first of all, you've told this story many times as well.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get into NASA? What was your career to get in there?
Actually, going back in history a bit now, when my mother and father, Abraham Russell Johnston, was a pilot during World War II. He lost his life in the war, and I grew up only looking at pictures of my dad as a pilot. And my dream was always to grow up and become a pilot too. Later on in life, I had the opportunity to go to the Oklahoma Military Academy, where I became a captain, advanced to OTC, and then I went off to the Marine Corps and was assigned to the Marine Aviation Program in Pensacola, Florida. And this is where I learned to fly. After completing that and then leaving and going back to the Marine Corps at El Toro, just not too far from Santa Ana, California. And I went ahead and got my civilian pilot's license and commercial multi-engine instrument-rated flight instructor licenses, completed my service to the Marine Corps, 6 years, and left. My brother, Dr. A.R. Johnston, was one of the engineers working for NASA down at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. And he said for me to get myself down. They were building up for the Apollo program. The Gemini program wasn't finished at the time. So he said, get down here, the opportunities are great. And they're looking for people who've got flight, pilot experience, and engineering, electronics. So I had an associate's degree in aviation electronics. And my pilot's license, I went down to Houston, applied to 5 of the major aerospace companies, and got offers from every one of them. And then I decided I would rather be a part of the lunar module team, because that was the ones that are going to land on the moon. And that put me at the right place at the right time to do the right thing. So that's where I started.
What was that like to go into NASA in those years? I mean, what was happening around those years as well?
They were finishing up with the Gemini program. Actually, Gemini, I'll probably get it wrong. It's been a few years. It was either Gemini 8 or Gemini 12, one or the other. I think it was 8. And we were just getting ready to get the lunar module designated as LTA-8, Lunar Test Article number 8. Then we went to the Grumman Corporation on Long Island, and I was one of the, became one of the chief test conductors of the final phase in the assembly line, because they had LTA-8 lined up, because we're going to be testing it in the vacuum chambers. Then they had LTA-8 9, which was going to be the first one to go into into Earth orbit, Apollo 9, so that it could find out if we could rendezvous and dock, etc. So then from there, we had to come back to Houston and wait until we were able to get the lunar module down there and put it in the vacuum chambers and start doing our testing.
How many people were working in different sort of areas of NASA on this full mission? There must have been so many different compartments.
It's amazing, really, because when John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the president, said we are going to go to the moon and return safely, and the corporations and things that were hired, they hired the best they could find, and the people, well, I'll say like myself, but I was one of the youngest ones on the lot with it. The thing was that we wanted to get as many people there. So I can only tell you with Grumman, once we had landed on the moon, Grumman had to make the decision when President Nixon that we were no longer going to be going on routine flights to the moon, research and development flights to the moon. We would be doing just routine flights, as though it was like going down to the local bar for a drink. We're just going to fly to the moon and land and come back. That simple. So Grumman laid off 30,000 employees nationwide. So you're looking at 30,000 from Grumman. You're looking at tens of thousands from the other major corporations. So there was a tremendous layoff. In fact, it was so difficult that we had PhD scientists in the streets of downtown Houston selling newspapers for a while and that's why we had an exit, if you will, of the unbelievable talented people in the world to leave the space program and get back into industry, back into research and doing what they're doing. Because the challenge was over. We met the challenge. We beat the Russians to the moon and back, and now we paid the price. The jobs ended, and we had to find something else to do.
So were you there when Buzz and Neil Armstrong were there as well?
I was there I was part of NASA as a contractor all the way through Apollo 14, but I was still involved because I went over to the Lunar and Planetary Science Building, where I became the director of the Data and Photo Control Department, and it's meant that I had direct access to all of the original film, all the original negatives, all the original enlargements, everything, and that was where the information was really going on, is there, and where we were keeping the lunar samples and making them available to the scientists around the world. So each time it was a phase. When we would leave one contractor and stuff, we could move over into another and take a good job over there.
But because you was in that kind of club, in a sense,
in a way,
it was easy to move around jobs.
Yes, it was. Because once one contract ended, another contract was given to another company, and it might be exactly, in my case, it was almost no moment of tension, because one day I'm working for Grumman, the next day I'm working for Brown and Root Northrop, the next I'm working with ILC, and as each contract would end, I would move down until you get, the only biggest problem with that is that you're not with any of them long enough to have a retirement. So after phasing out the end of the Apollo programs and things like that, I finally reached a point where I said, I've got to get into, because I was getting into my late 30s. So I chose to leave and go into the regular industry and be involved in the military testing of rockets and missiles, and then over to the Boeing company in Seattle as a 737 flight instructor. So it was just moving from one to the other, what you had to do.
Did you enjoy going back to flight?
I did enjoy very much going back and working with pilots from corporate as well as international airlines, and the people from over. I had the director of the CAAC, which is the equivalent of our FAA, and he didn't speak English. He had a translator there, and he wanted to talk with me a while. He asked me, he says, how do you like working with people from other countries and other languages and other cultures? And I've got the translator speaking to me, and I said, okay, translate this the best you can. I said, I like everybody. I don't care what their race, religion, creed, or color. But I don't like assholes who don't care what their race, religion, creed, or color is. He laughed, he gave me a hug. Translator said we'd have been friends wherever we met. And that philosophy has worked very, very good for me throughout my whole life.
Did you ever manage to get in contact with anybody that was working with you at NASA in the departments you were working in?
I wound up contacting a few of them myself in order to find out what else was going on and keeping up with it. But mostly it pretty well ended in 1980 when I left NASA in Houston and went to work up for the Boeing company.
Do any of those people, do you think, know of the book that you've released?
Well, there are those, how to put this? There's one particular gentleman that I actually worked with for a while on Skylab, and his name was James Oberg, and we were great friends. We would spend time together and philosophy. He came in after the Apollo, so he didn't really know what I had done and what I was a part of. And it winds up that he was connected with Dr. Thornton Page, who was challenged to keep any of the knowledge or information of things that we may have discovered on the moon or in space and what have you down, and they became what we call the debunkers. And Oberg became one of my biggest challenges throughout my whole life, because just about wherever I'd go, whatever country, he would go in and try to shoot down me and saying, oh, he's not who he says he is, he didn't do these things. Well, excuse me, but all they had to do is go to my book. Well, my books weren't even out the first time, but then finally I got tired of publishing the records into the internet, showing that I had the documents, the records, the degrees, the information, and then now I don't have to do that, because it's in the books, and people around the world, when someone goes out to try to discredit me or besmirch my character, friends like Brett Shepard and others, they come forward and they republish things for it, and just, it's over with.
So all your documents are in your book?
Absolutely. Not all, but I mean 90%. Yeah. So if they attack me and say you didn't do this, then they're attacking the NASA specialists that have written letters of commendation and highly respect, as well as different corporations, and giving me a lot of credit for the jobs that I did for them.
What do you think about the people that are fixated on the idea that we never went to the moon?
I get that a lot when I go to some cities, and it really is the younger generation, and I'm I've got was it 5 grandkids, 18 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. Okay, the younger generations have a tendency to listen to others that are babbling, and then they'll think that's true, and then they'll start talking. So when they come up and say, well, you didn't really go to the moon, like Buzz Aldrin, for instance, he got sick and tired of hearing this one reporter saying, you're lying, you didn't go, and he finally turned around and just clocked him. I'd love to do that sometime, but I take my time and I say, okay, do you know what the Hubble telescope is? Oh yeah. And we have satellites that go around the moon taking pictures. Oh yeah. And they photographed each one of the landing spots on the moon that the Apollo landed at, right? Yes. I said, and they'll zoom in on the descent stage of the lunar module still setting on the moon. I said, how did it get there if we didn't go to the moon? They go, oh, I'll have to think about it. They should have thought about it before they opened their mouth.
Do you think there was a program where there was a backup recording taking place somewhere else, that there was a stage set somewhere just in case they never did make it, and that you see these movies, what's the movie called? Capricorn 1, for example. Do you think there was some program like that set up ready just in case there were any issues of making it to the moon?
Yes, there was. His name was Stanley Kubrick. He was a producer of films. He did create a false landing on the moon in a fake area, and this was in case, because we were in a race with Russia to be the first ones to land on the moon and return safely to the home, to the Earth. And in the event that we had a disaster, we had that show, well, yes, we succeeded, we did that, and on the way back in, coming in through the Earth's atmosphere, they burned up and they died. That was the plan that Stanley Kubrick did that. The movie was kept silent until after the Apollo program, and someone leaked it, which always happens, and now those that are challenged to believe that we actually succeeded, they'll go and look at the fake one and say, we never went to the moon.
Which one's the fake one? Which one's the fake footage?
It would have been the Apollo 11 that they're trying to fake. Okay.
So the Apollo 11 footage was the original footage of the moon landing with Buzz, Neil Armstrong?
Yeah, just be sure that I'm not letting you put the words wrong here. Kubrick's film was to show that we landed safely on the moon. The astronauts went out and picked up samples and went back inside the lunar module and it took off and to come back to the Earth. And that was done in the event because of the race with the Russians to be sure that we got there. But it was never used because we were so successful with Apollo, and then went on, of course, to all the other flights. But this was a backup that was created in the event of a disaster. So that way we could show that, well, look, we have the films prove that we went to the moon, only the first ones were fake. The real ones, which we took, once you know what the amount of gravity, 1/6 of the Earth's gravity is, and the environment, some of the shadows and things are off on Kubrick's versus the real thing from the film, the pictures now. During Apollo 11, the only astronaut that had a camera on his chest was Neil Armstrong. Buzz Aldrin didn't have one, so almost all the pictures of the astronaut on the lunar surface during Apollo 11 was looking at Buzz Aldrin moving around. Okay, so since we had those, that was what that and I had those in my archive, the records that I maintained when I was the director of the data and photo control supervisor. So I had the films, I had this 35 millimeter slides, I had 70 millimeter Hasselblad's pictures, and the individual photographs that were taken all over the whole moon.
So the Apollo 11 moon mission, where we land on the moon for the first time.
Yes.
Yeah. That footage that's out there now is the Kubrick footage.
No.
That's the original. That's
That
not
is the original.
So the material that we see when we watch back the Apollo 11 moon landing, that's genuine.
There's a genuine original, and I'll quote this, but unless someone had access, which they did, of the other one, and they just purposely want to put in the fake one. But the main one that was released to the public after the Apollo 11 was successfully back and they were out was the original and is the original.
So where are we able to view the Kubrick film nowadays?
That I have no idea, because it should have been destroyed. Well, it is evidence of what was going on during the Cold War. It's fully understandable. But it's so easy for people to get confused if they don't talk with people that were there. And there's very few of us left.
So that Kubrick film is not out there in the general public really anywhere?
I don't know that. It could be. And that's where you're going to have someone who truly knows what happened, and you can then look at the actual footage, the actual film in NASA's archive, and compare it to whatever people are trying to say this is the fake one. There could be a fake one, but the one from NASA, compare the two and you'll know which one's which.
Was there any talk between anyone where you worked at that at the time of the moon landing that this idea was out there, this idea was perpetrated, that this could be a possibility?
No, we didn't know. And I say we, the rank and file, the engineers, the scientists, this rank and file people that were busy in mission control and everything else, we had no idea that Kubrick had even made a fake landing video.
Where are you getting the information from that you feel that is true, though, that Kubrick did?
Well, it was because I lived through that, and I had firsthand experience of seeing the fake and having been part of the mission control people and seeing the real.
Right, that's where I'm getting to. You saw the Kubrick fake film.
Only the same that most anyone else saw on some of the news, or not the news, but the TV programs and things that tried to say this is what really happened. We didn't go.
Is what you mean? The live transmissions were not the live transmissions?
No, the live transmissions that we had from Apollo 11 that I was involved with were the original ones. That was coming directly to.
So that's what I'm trying to get at. Where did you see the fake footage that you think Kubrick filmed?
15, 20 years later.
Where?
Geez, where would I have seen it? Well, geez, that's been a long time ago. I think one of the research centers, and kind of like a library, but not really, but where they were saying that this, or it would come out on the news, and some people it would be like a documentary, and they're saying this was the film that was made by Kubrick, and this people are believing that it's the real one. It's not. So that's the only source I had.
Okay. Did it look similar?
Well, they did a fairly good job, but when you have been a part of the whole Apollo program, and you've had the privilege of working with each and every mission that went, you can spot and look at the differences very easy. But for the rank and file individuals looking at it, they can be spooked and spoofed into not understanding, picking the wrong thing.
So the only thing I'm having trouble here with is just really trying to figure out when you saw that. But I don't. Maybe it doesn't matter. But there's no definitiveness of when you saw the fake footage. Or do you know what I mean? I'm just trying to figure out when if you think you saw the Kubrick film, right?
Yes.
How would you know that was the Kubrick compared to what was transmitted?
I can tell because I can watch the movements of the astronauts. I can look at the shadows. I can look at the thing. Having been there and seen the real thing coming back live, 10 years later when I'm looking at whenever they came out with some of the fake footage and stuff, it's obvious which is real and which is not.
So you think some of the fake footage got out there and was disseminated into where it got disseminated into, and sometimes when they were showing the moon landings, for example, on TV, that wasn't the footage that you remember seeing.
No, well, you've got both of them out there. You've got to look at both. Once Kubrick stuff got loose, and whenever it would pop up, and you would have to do a comparison and take a look. They did a fairly good job, but in my opinion, looking at it, it's not a difficult thing to tell the difference.
Okay.
The average person's going to be fooled, though.
Yes, yeah. Did the astronauts ever was it reported ever that the astronauts were quite sick from the space travel sometimes?
Quite sick.
Or were they, I mean, obviously it takes a big toll on someone's body to go, even to the International Space Station right now, long durations.
And I can attest that personally. Whenever I would be doing testings in a full pressurized spacesuit, I could lose anywhere from 7 to 10 pounds of perspiration doing that. To stay hydrated and to stay healthy during it, you've got to follow the rules and keep yourself, like I say, hydrated and being able to stay healthy. But in fact, that all the astronauts I spoke with that came back from their mission, they came back just fine, healthy, no problem. A little worn out, a little tired, but that you get over that within a week or two.
In the department you were working in, where you was in charge of, how would you say, was you in charge of access to photos?
Actually, it being the director of the data and photo control department, I had direct access from the photo lab of the original negatives, the original pictures, the original films, like that. And I would get copies of them and have them brought over into my lab if we needed them for a presentation to some of the scientists coming around from the world. So,
what did you get to see on those photos?
Well, now when you say what did I get to see, I think one of the biggest aha moment was during Apollo 14's film. Dr. Thornton Page, who was the director of the Lunar and Planetary Science Department, contacted me and asked me to get a copy of the Apollo 14 16 millimeter film strip, which in this case it would be Dr. Edgar Mitchell, astronaut Mitchell, had filmed holding the DAC camera, DAC, and was taking pictures out of the triangular shaped window of the lunar module. Now, what was the big shocker there is when he asked me to set up a showing for him and 6 other scientists from the Lunar and Planetary Science Department in the building next to the Mission Control. I made arrangements to have what's called a gun sequence camera projector, and those in the military might know that, well, or the news people, whenever they've seen the dog fights and you see the tracers going, well, each shot created a frame. And so, you're getting able actually to follow the high speed. So I set up the showing for him and the other scientists in the back of the room. And I'm showing this video. And this one is about a 15-minute, 60 millimeter video of coming around on the back side of the moon and going close, almost over the top of the crater called Tsiolkovsky. Now, for a lot of people don't realize that since the Russians got a satellite around the moon first, they started naming all the major craters and things on the backside of the moon after famous Russian scientists. So here we are, and we're tracking along, and we're watching the pictures, and we're coming up to the crater called Tsiolkovsky. Now, the sun angle, it was such on the backside, it would be like a half moon on the front side and a half moon on the backside. Okay, and in the shadowed area of Tsiolkovsky crater, there was a cluster of domes, luminite, and I think the easiest way to describe it is if people would take their hand, turn it palm up, and bring their 5 fingers together and take a look at the tops. That's what we were looking at in the shadowed area of crater Tsiolkovsky. Dr. Page had me freeze the film, zoom in close, back up the film, track back in. I could go 1 frame, 3 frames, 5 frames in our full speed. And he had me go back and forth several times, and he turned to the other 6 scientists and said, "Well, boys, what do you think of that?" And they all gave a big chuckle and laugh. And it took me a long time to realize that they obviously knew what they were going to see, because they knew the exact film for me to show. What happened after that, though, was what really tripped me, is that Dr. Page says, okay, finish the film. And I finished the end of it, and I take the film out and boxing it up in the canister and getting ready to go back to the photo lab and turn it back in. And the 6 scientists, they were all just talking away, but I couldn't hear what they were saying. So when I finished, I left and went back to the photo lab. And now you have to understand, the photo lab is 3 compartments. The front is for people can just come in and request a film or a picture and order it, and they'll get it. In the middle is where technical people would request a certain film or picture and be able to analyze it and do it in there. The third locker was a environmentally controlled, cool storage area to maintain the original negatives and the original prints. The biggest kick came when I walked into the middle room. And there was like a 4 foot by 4 foot by 3 foot. Now you can put it in meters if you want to, of a light table, which is like an opaque glass top with lights illuminated from inside. And there were 3 people. There were 2 gentlemen and 1 lady, and they were sitting over there looking at 8 by 10 negatives on top of the light table, and they were painting out things on the surface and on the horizon of the moon. And since I had the responsibility of the validity of the film and pictures for scientists around the world at my data and photo control department, I asked them, I said, what's going on here? And one of the guys quipped very quickly. He says, oh, we're professional strippers. And the lady, she said, no, come on now, what we're doing, we are stripping it out, but so that we won't confuse people about what they see. And I took that as, that's strange. But I was in a hurry. I had to go ahead and check in things. And I might throw in here, decades later, I ran into one, I'll get to that in a minute, a lady that was probably the lady that was inside there doing the painting, because it's fascinating 40 years later to talk to someone. Anyway, so I checked the film in, and I was headed back to the LRL, Lunar Receiving Laboratory, and I actually ran into Dr. Page on the sidewalk, and I said, Dr. Page, what happened? Whoops, I went too far for it. Back up just a minute. What happened once I checked the film in, the next day I was required to pull the same film out, same number, and take it to the auditorium at the Johnston Space Center and set up a showing for the rank and file engineers, technicians, and janitors, and everybody that might want to see some great pictures taken during Apollo 14 of the backside of the moon. And my brother, Dr. A.R. Johnston, I hadn't told him that we had seen this base on the backside of the moon until I got him over there. I said, you won't believe what we found on the backside of the moon. So I set everything up, and for the first showing, and here we are, we're looking at tracking along the surface of the moon, about 60 miles up on the backside, approaching Tsiolkovsky Crater. And here comes Tsiolkovsky Crater, half of it's in shadow, and the same area where the domes were, they were gone. So I froze the camera, told the audience, I said, I've got technical difficulties here, one moment. And I took the film out, and I checked all the way through that whole sequence going past Tsiolkovsky, all of the holes lined up within 24 hours. Now, since then, I've wondered, maybe they made the fake one before they showed it to me, and part of it was to see if I could handle the truth. But anyway, there didn't seem to be any damage or anything or changing done to that film. So I had put it back in, and I finished showing, and the audience was delighted because here they had seen this first really great pictures, a film of the backside of the moon. No one told them that there was supposed to be alien bases there on it. So I took it and checked it back into the photo lab, and then as I'm leaving going back to the LRL, I run into Dr. Page, and for those who don't know who Dr. Page was, he had lost a left eye, and he actually wore a patch over his right eye, like a pirate, right? But this is just the way he chose to live, because and probably, I don't want to guess for how the eye might look without an eyeball in it. But I caught Dr. Page, what happened to those domes that we found in Tsiolkovsky? And he looked at me with the one eye, and he said, there's never anything there. And because of the contracts and the layoffs and the changes, that was something I didn't get to look into much further than that. It was something that was gnawing at me when it was, and then that part of my contract was over with, and I wound up going to another branch, and another branch after that. So that was the aha, that we were not faking, but we were trying to take the original films, some pictures, and smudging out, or we didn't have Photoshop. People didn't know we didn't have Photoshop back then. They would take a sheet of acetate, lay it over the top of a negative or a positive transparency, and then they would paint out on the acetate what they wanted to do, and then they'd rephotograph it.
Yeah, you mentioned Edgar Mitchell as being one of the astronauts whose photos you got to see.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you think he was aware of that was down there, or do you think it was too far out of his peripheral to even to know it was there? Because he never talked about that, did he? That there were structures on the moon.
The answer to that question is yes, he did know. Because one of the other things that I had in my files at the Data and Photo Control was the translation, or the typed out of the communications between each of the astronauts, etc. And during, a lot of people, like Oberg said, oh, they never went in place close to Tchaikovsky, I mean, blah, blah. And yet, when you get the transcript of the communications of Alan Shepard and Edgar Mitchell in the lunar module, and anyway, the other astronaut in the command module, they were chatting, talking back and forth. They were talking about where they were coming up on a crater, and then, there's Tchaikovsky. Yep, got it in sight. And it's all in transcript. So yes, they were talking about it. They knew it was there.
But did they mention on the transcripts, oh my God, there's something?
They didn't come out and say, oh my God. Alan said to them, do you have it? He says, I got it. And so, they knew they were being recorded what was going on. So it's a matter of how far are you going to go. And so you say, you don't just look and say, yeah, I can see that. You say, I got it.
So that if it was picked up by anyone, Russians or whatever.
You're talking about their communications?
Yeah. Then it would be kind of, even if they saw something, it's still going to be said in a way that's not obvious.
Yes.
And that never made its way to the public, that communication, because it was blocked off from...
It did.
It did? Right.
Well, I guess it did. Either that or it was what I had in my archive at the Data and Photo Control Department. I'll have to check with my friend, because I think he used the copy I had and was taking the transcript. Even photographed it, and we have photographs of those pages that shows the communications.
How much do you think that changes a person to see that kind of thing? I mean, he had a Kundalini experience, didn't he? Edgar did, whilst in space.
What kind of?
He called it a Kundalini kind of experience.
You'll have to explain that one to me.
The overview effect.
The overview effect. He had an aha epiphany moment of just what the nature of reality is, in the sense that there was he's much more than his body, in a sense.
I can
much more going on.
All of the missions, the astronauts really didn't know what they were going to run up against, and that was part of the debriefing when they returned to the Earth. And the psychologists that did the debriefing, and this is what I've been told, is that in the debriefing they were given blocks of memory to keep them from being able to recall some of the things that went on during their mission. So,
well, that's a different type of debriefing, isn't it?
That's just definitely a different kind of debriefing.
That's almost like being put under regression or something, and those things are taken out. I don't know. I mean,
well, it's or in some cases where I've been told that they were threatened if they ever said anything, because they had signed the top secret agreements that you were not allowed to mention any of this stuff. You have to keep it totally silent.
Have you signed those agreements?
I did.
And why are you talking?
Why am I talking? Because it's been one hell of a long time ago whenever it happened, and I kept waiting and waiting and waiting for NASA and them to come forward with the true information and materials, and it finally got to the point where I decided it was time to come forward and show what I had collected and saved.
But those agreements are binding for life, aren't they?
I suppose that is true, but then you have to look at one thing: is how far do you go in keeping a something that is way past due knowledge and due information to the masses of the people. It depends on, and my beliefs and everything else is that we paid for it with our money. It was supposed to have been shared with all the other countries in the world of what was on the moon, and that never happened. And so it came the time that I decided it was time to take the archive, the records, and the information that I kept, and make them public.
Have you? I mean, but you've gone against your secrecy. You've gone against the agreement that you've signed that was for life. You've gone against that agreement now.
And if you take the fact that they were testing me with the showing, Dr. Page and them, and then me showing the films to the masses, and the reaction that I had, that where did they go, then I probably put myself in a very difficult position. Yet, 45 years later, I decided let's put it this way, I ran into a few people that had gathered that was a fact that had happened, and I spoke to them privately, and they said, we have got to get this to the public. So the concern was, didn't want anything to happen to me physically, so the choice was made to take me to Washington, D.C., to the National Press Club, and present the pictures and information and have the discussion with the press from other countries all over the world, and make it public so that they couldn't come around and deny it and do something to me.
Oh, was that famous press club that Stephen Greer put on?
Not the same. Stephen Greer did his own thing with the National Press Club and with those, and with Congress.
Disclosure Project.
Oh, and yes, and Dr. Greer, we're talking about decades later when Dr. Greer started the Disclosure Project.
But you went on to a different...
I went in 1995 to Washington, D.C., to the National Press Club. First time, again, in 1997.
How did you get these photos out? What photos did you take out? How did you get them out?
Okay, as I said, I was the director of the Data and Photo Control Department. And I was with the Brown and Root Northrop Corporation, working for NASA. Here I maintain a whole room full of filing cabinets because I had folders for each and every picture that each mission had, and their communications, their reports. And Mr. Leskawa, my supervisor, came in one day. He says, "Okay, kid, get rid of all but one set." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Just get rid of them, throw them away. We don't need them." And I said, "Wait a minute. Now, we paid for these with our tax money. There are university science departments who would love to have copies of these. Their geology department and everything else. Why don't we just give it? You can't do it. Just get rid of them." And I argued with him for about 10 minutes. Finally, he said the key words. He says, "I don't care what you do. Just get rid of them." Well, if he didn't care what I did with them, I had 5 sets. We're talking about hundreds of pictures, as well as positive transparencies, 90 millimeter, 70 millimeter Hasselblads, etc. I took 3 sets of them, took them out and dumped them in the trash, the Dempsey dumpster. Okay, that's 3 of them. I took one, I kept it in my filing cabinets and got rid of about half of all the filing cabinets except for one because of condensing it down. That got rid of number 4. Number 5, since I said you don't care what you do, just get rid of them, I put them in I put them in a duffel bag, military duffel bag, and that evening when I went home, I put them in my car and took them home.
Do you still have them now?
I do.
What do they show?
There are a lot of different things, and one of the things that I wasn't that, the only thing I knew about at the time was the Tchaikovsky crater, and I just had packed everything up. I put them in a safe that I had bought that was just packed full of these things, and then after leaving NASA and winding up going to work for the Boeing company up in Seattle, they always traveled with me, but I wasn't into looking. I was saving them till a particular, maybe sometime, and every once in a while someone would come over the house and would pull things out and look at them and talk about them and stuff like that. But by and large, they stayed locked up in my safe for those probably until 1995.
When did you start discovering that there were anomalies on these pictures you had?
Okay. This was before cell phones and before real instant communication other than telephones. And in the Boeing company, we had inter-office mail, where if you had a mail and something you want to send to someone, you put it in an envelope, put their mail code on, put it in, and the people that worked for us would take them over to the other building, and the person would get. We had a group of 4 of us. We called ourselves the Majestic 12, which was kind of a play. And we liked following some of the not science fiction, but the UFO books and magazines and things like that. And we were following a lot of the conversations going in, persons like Mr. Richard C. Hoagland talking about the face on Mars and the things. And as this was the time when I was a flight instructor for 737s, and one of my friends called me. He says, "Oh, by the way, Mr. Hoagland's going to be in town tonight," and I wasn't scheduled to fly. So it's good. So I'll you get a nice book that you're reading. You'd like to get the author's signature, and it just because it's something I like to do. So I dressed up and went down to the Space Needle there in Seattle, and the building next to it, and went into where he was giving his lecture. And I walked up to the desk to the lady that was there and to pay my fee. And I said, "Oh, would you?" Wrote a letter of introduction to Mr. Hoagland, telling me that I have these slides, I have these pictures of these missions and stuff. And I said, "Could you, Mr. Hoagland, take a look, have this letter?" She picked it up. She's looking at it. She's, "You're who we've been looking for." And whoa, maybe I'm in trouble. And a few minutes later, Mr. Hoagland came out, and he had looked at me at that. He says, "Come on in, sit down in front. I want to talk to you after the presentation." Afterwards, he made arrangements to come over to my house and take a look at what I mentioned, the records that I kept. And so it was about 7:30 a.m. the next day. He and 4 or 5 others of his crew came to my house, and they're going through looking at some of the pictures. I had what's called a flip stand. I had every picture is in its own plastic sheath inside of a stand where you could thumb through them, about this long, 2 of them. And that was only part of the pictures, but then they're going through and look at those, and then 3x5 notebooks where I had the pictures with the sleeves to keep them. It's what protected them from oxidation, and it's why they've lasted so well. At any rate, while he's looking at these pictures, and some of the other people said, we've seen, some other people would come over and say, "Oh, would you look at this frame or this picture?" And they say, "It looks like it's going to be this something here." And that when they looked at the actual copies of the original, they said, "Oh my God, you can see it here. These look like structures, looks like buildings in certain areas. That types are domes." And while we're doing that, my wife is over looking at the pictures for the first time. That really paid attention. She's looking at one, and this is the visor on, I believe it was Dave Scott's visor. And she said, "What's this reflection in the visor of the astronaut?" Well, this has been a key that we've used forever. If you want to see what NASA did not want you to see, look at the reflection in the astronaut being photographed. Because you look at the visor and you'll see the reflection of the astronaut that's back here taking the picture. And in this particular one, above the astronaut, in the not atmosphere, above their crater where they were, is this craft hovered up there, right there in the visor of it. And that was one of those shocking moments. Hoagland and his people like that, fantastic. They felt like they had gotten the smoking gun that brought out the. That's when he decided to send me to the National Press Club.
So you had a history with Hoagland then. In the end, there was some history there.
Yes,
that's interesting.
That's when it started. Right, that's my history.
And therefore that got you out there.
That's where I got my neck in the noose and put out public. But then the position was at the concern, because there had been, and I can't remember the name, other scientists and things that had tried to come forward with information. They had accidents or died of some sudden disease that burned them up inside, and they died. And he said, "We have to be sure we get you made public as quick as we can, because that's the only safety you have, is that the people are going to look at, no, he's presented the information that was promised to be brought forward."
I see, and you feel that's probably why you've been left alone to even be here right now in
Yes.
2018 and speaking with myself all those years later, even on from Hoagland.
Yes.
That's amazing. And is there any pictures you want to talk about in particular that you might want to just...
Well, I mentioned the one particularly, the Apollo 14 and over Tchaikovsky's one. The other pictures, well,
actually, what we could do is there any, we can put them on the screen, so don't worry about the book.
Okay.
But is there any pictures that you would like to mention in this part right now?
Well, yes. As I mentioned, of course, in the visor on Apollo 15, of the hovering craft that was above them.
Do you think they were aware of that craft?
I'm sorry?
Do you think they were aware of the craft?
Yes, I think they had to be aware. And whenever you speak or spoke to Some of them, there were things there that you would not believe. I guess one of the biggest moments that I had, another one was on Apollo 15, and as they're coming around, and the way this happened is I was getting ready deciding to write my autobiography and tell the story of all the records, and I'm talking with Brett Shepard, and I'm showing him the command module, because the lunar module Apollo 15 ascent stage had already flown up, had gone into orbit, had rendezvoused with the command module. And one of the things we always had to do, well, I say we because I felt like I was with them on the mission control, is that they would do a little dance around each other to be sure that there were no damages done during the launch or what have you, and then they could do their docking. Okay, so I'm explaining to him, looking at the command and service module, and he says, "Look at the lunar surface." And I go, "What? No." He said, "No, look what's on the lunar surface." And I looked very closely, and your eyes look at, and you cannot believe this whole. There are probably at least a dozen or more domes, all in perfect little lines, perfect little stripes, and with the perfect distance between them, and then some larger domes. If you've ever been to the VLA, the very large arrays, we have them in New Mexico. Other countries have some very large arrays for communications and for picking up signals from satellites. There it was, all of these all nicely laid out, looking at right there on the lunar surface, close to the terminator on it. And this was what I discovered a little bit later in life, because of the way they were surveyed out, the way humans do. We survey things out and we block them off and we make it square, right? Whereas in Tsiolkovsky, they made it blend in with the crater rim and the whole bit, stuff like that. So I'm willing to say that was my shock to say that's most likely part of our secret space program, that we really are already on the moon.
But having worked in the NASA arena, knowing how vast it was, how many people were involved in this, not one of you thought at the time, oh, there's some other secret program taking place elsewhere.
There was something we had hoped that we continued on with the space program that we were, but most all of us, because the companies we were with, we were taking the directions of what our goal was, and figuring out ways to do it with these massive Saturn V vehicles, and we were putting men on top of these things and lighting the fuse and hoping they didn't explode. I mean, it was dangerous. Yet since then, and the research that I've done, others have done, you go all the way back to the end of World War I, and you had Dwight D. Eisenhower. General Eisenhower became president of the United States. He in turn, it appears that he met with extraterrestrials and made agreements with them in order to get more information for the kind of technology that he felt we needed in America to be able to control peace throughout the world.
Do you think we only just made it to the moon?
That we just made it with?
Yeah, do you think with the technology that we had, do you think we're looking back at the Apollo mission, we just only barely made it?
I think there was so many things that could go wrong, that it was absolutely by the hair of your teeth, whatever, to make it to the moon.
But you having been there, you having at least worked in a department of NASA and everything else, or been there for some of the Apollo missions, right?
Right.
Is it hard to get your head around that? Could there have been a secret space program running at the same time, or do you think it ran afterwards? Because if you're saying, what if those domes were ours on there, right?
Yes.
Well, where the hell are they taking off from? Where is that secret space program, based from? I mean, I know David Wilcott will say it's from Antarctic, and that seems like a great place to run a secret space program.
From where?
And the Antarctic.
Oh, Antarctica?
Antarctica. Sorry.
I don't think so there. But what I do know, that once we got to seriously looking at, were we the first ones to go to the moon, and we get into looking at some of the reels and pictures and things, looking at the surface, just like I was looking at the spacecraft. And here comes craft passing up the lunar module, or the command module, streaking along way below us, the lunar surface. How could they, pass us up that fast and be moving around if they weren't some form of advanced technology, which we didn't have?
So, do you believe in the secret space program?
It's only been the last few years, and by that I mean the last 3 or 4 years, that I've really become. It's been kind of hard, because here we thought we were doing the most advanced technology in the world and the universe, and we've gone to the moon and back, and then to step back and realize that we're just barely getting started. There is other intelligent sentient beings, and really to think that we are the only intelligent beings in the universe is kind of ridiculous when we find out. And now there's been more and more evidence coming along looking at that, wow, they've been here for a long time watching us.
So what is the secret space program to you, if it does exist in your thinking?
The secret space program, to me, is the technology and the ability to use anti-gravity systems, even by warping space. And it's interesting, some of us in our lives have been either manipulated with or worked with, because I know that when I was only 15, that in the Oklahoma University in Norman, a professor took several of us, Jack Lancaster, myself, and a couple other youngsters, and showed us a video of, one moment please, let me get this straight, where in there were. That's a frustration.
It's all right, but you saw a video that you think did something to you, or what programmed you, or?
Yes, and that's what we're dealing with right now with the hypnotic regression, to find out whether I was actually messed with. See, the whole thing is, I've got all the technology, all the evidence, all the information, everything else, and I've maintained total confidence of knowledge of everything there. Now to suddenly find out that I may have been messed with, okay, is making me step off on a board in a little shaky ground of when you do that, you've got your audience, or the people looking at it saying, oh, you're one of those, you're wacko, because we've been programmed in Great Britain and Canada and the United States to poo-poo anything. Oh, UFOs don't exist. When now they're finally coming forward and showing, Rendlesham and all the rest of these things.
But then again, that may not have been. That video you're referring to may not have pre-programmed you to take a certain career path and all that. Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows? If you can't remember it in this moment, that's okay as well.
It'll come back.
Yeah, it'll come back, and maybe it's not meant to be included in here as well. It's interesting what you're saying, but who knows? Yeah, I think you've got a lot of evidence here that really does speak yes. a lot.
Yes.
And would you be okay to say that maybe this isn't a secret space program on the moon, that actually it's something else?
No.
Alien.
Yes. The evidence that I've come across now is that we have been, our DNA, we've been manipulated. Now, I have a degree in theology. I've studied religions, just about every major religion in the world. And it's very difficult to come around and say, where did this information of deity or of Christ or of Buddha and what have you came from? Yet when you start getting translations that, like Zachariah Sitchin had done of the ancient Sumerian text and all those, you get to reading what was transcribed in there, and you compare that to the biblical stories and things, you start seeing a lot of commonality between the two.
So could what you saw on the moon be from a past race that was once on Earth that took off and, is
Oh, I don't think that they took off. I think they're still there.
They're still there.
Because now the scientists, astronomers and all have testified saying that our moon is an anomaly, that it's way too big for the size of the planet that it's with. It's way too close. And in order for it to be that, it has to be almost very hollow, a lot of hollow inside of it.
And when you look at the Stanley Kubrick film 2001 with the monolith, that progressed us, and when you're telling me about the Stanley Kubrick's involvement maybe in the film, and that there's been a film made about that just recently as well, a few years ago about that. That's one thing. It would not surprise me if Kubrick was much deeper involved in information.
Absolutely.
And he was trying to drip feed it, like his last movie, Eyes Wide Shut, really.
Yes.
With this sort of Illuminati thing, or a controlling factor, whether you want to call it Illuminati or not, maybe it's something else.
The evidence is starting to prove that is a fact. And a lot of times we're seeing that Hollywood has had access to information or been briefed on or some way that they go and create their own little story. And in the future, when they finally get it, we look back and say, that's almost exactly what happened.
And entertainment's a good thing as well, right? We all
Right.
like to be entertained. There's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, drip fed in ways that they've got a story to tell,
Sure.
and you know why not? You know, it makes good entertainment. So, how has this spiritually changed you? The work that you've been on. How have you gone through your own kind of awakening experience since looking into this subject? Has it forced you to look at the consciousness side?
You said spiritually. Okay. Yes, it has. And I go way back, my families go way back to being staunch Southern Baptist, very, very staunch in our family religion-wise, and going through the Reformed Baptist Seminary in Denver, Colorado, and doing a thesis on marriage, its dawn, development, and dissolution, and you wind up going back to the ancient Sumerians and things like that. And then coming to realization, that we are not the only intelligent beings in the universe, and then you're able to start tying it together with that if you're taking the science idea of what evolution is and how many we should still actually the monkeys and gorillas are still existing. They haven't evolved, okay, but how did we get evolved?
Well, some are saying that the apes right now, there's evidence that they're entering the Stone Age.
There you go. Slowly, but how many thousands of years has it taken for them to get there? Whereas we made a sudden jump. Okay, how did that? And when you get into the proper text, Zechariah Sitchin's translations of those, you're finding out that our DNA has been tankered. It doesn't bother me a bit. I still believe that there is a deity, a supreme being, a God, and most of your aliens that have been coming forward admit that.
So this work that you've been doing has opened you up now.
Yes.
To that side, which it always goes to the consciousness side in the end.
It's a tough translation at times, but once you've made it, then your mind is open, and I think that leaves you more open to not control, to communication with extraterrestrials.
What would you want your legacy to be?
What what?
What would you want your legacy of your work to be?
The legacy of my work is that he had enough guts to bring the information forward, and this is the time of full disclosure. I personally believe that 2018 will go down as the year of full disclosure. One thing that we have to accept, that just because we come forward with all the information, this tsunami I mentioned earlier has broken and coming over, and the governments have had to admit, okay, that's true, they're over the universe, and that we're now able to make direct contact with extras, so we don't wind up falling back. Now, if you have a world battle and stuff we'll fall back into primitive state.
Why did we publicly never go back to the moon?
Publicly, we were warned off of the moon, and on Apollo 17, on the return trip, there was, and this was picked up by ham radio operators and stuff. I'm only repeating what they transcribed to Mission Control, saying, it says, "Do not return. You're not ready yet." Okay, and this came from the vicinity of the moon, and as I understand it, maybe it was translated in different languages. I could be wrong on that, but then that around the world, there were operators that did pick up the signal and heard this. So now, if we weren't ready, but now we are ready for full disclosure, and that's the hard point. And that I've heard it may take as long as 10 years for us to make the transition. I don't know.
Well,
I'm ready now.
Who knows how long it will take? Who knows?
I don't think anyone really knows.
No.
But I think that the 40 or 50 years that I've been through has given us to the point where we now know that we can accept the fact that we're not alone in this universe. And I love I've forgotten who said it, that if we are that was Contact, and he says it's an awful lot of wasted space if we're alone.
Well, Ken Johnston Sr., just thank you so much for joining us.
Appreciate it very much.
Thank you so
for
much,
having me.
man. Thank you.